The 50-50 marriage is overrated, and chasing it leads to more heartbreak, resentment, and dysfunction than most people realize. But why is this the case? And what's a good alternative? That's exactly what we're going to be talking about in today's video. I'm Cameron, I'm a licensed therapist, wife, and mother, and this is my channel, Modern Marriage, where I share with you guys all the tips, resources, and insights that I've learned from working with couples in therapy so that you can start building the marriage that you've always wanted. As more women today are working than ever before, many people believe that the most admirable arrangement for working parents is a 50-50 marriage, in which both spouses equally contribute on the home, job, and kids fronts as much as possible, rather than one spouse working more while the other cares for the kids more, for example. But this arrangement usually doesn't work, and I'll use an analogy to explain why. For a moment, think of marriage like a pizza with a lot of toppings. If you were to try to cut the pizza perfectly in half, chances are one side would end up at least a little bit bigger than the other, and you definitely have to cut through some of the peppers and the onions and the pepperoni, and some of the cheese would likely slide off one piece onto another as you're pulling the two sides apart. At the very least, you'll end up with more of the onions on one side and more of the pepperonis on the other side, since none of the individual slices are identical. In other words, the more you focus on how close to equal both sides are, the more problems you're going to discover, and the less time and emotional energy you'll have left over to simply enjoy your pizza. And it turns out marriage is quite similar. So similar that when 50-50 marriages are intensely pursued, researchers have found that couples end up with more conflict and less satisfaction in their relationships. And as far as I can tell, there are 4 major reasons for this. But before I share these reasons, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this, and share this video with someone who you think might find it useful. So the 4 reasons that 50-50 marriages almost never work are: number 1, they're inflexible; number 2, they upset the balance of fair versus effective; number 3, they often aren't even what spouses want anyway; and ultimately, number 4, they lead to resentment. Number 1, 50-50 marriages are inflexible. Life changes, often out of nowhere, which is why the ability to change and adapt with life is so important. So naturally, one of the major problems with a 50-50 marriage is that it's completely inflexible. What happens if you or your spouse get sick, or the kids? What happens if you have to go out of town to visit a family member or go on a work trip, or if you're just kind of feeling blah one day and could use your spouse's help to pick up the slack? Are you supposed to then pay your spouse back later for the extra help that he or she gave you? Keeping such a close score of each other's contributions is almost always going to mean that someone will be losing, since our plans for how to divide up responsibilities rarely ever stand up to the test of reality. Number 2, these marriages upset the balance of fair versus effective. Obviously, having some level of perceived fairness between spouses in a marriage is important. We all have built-in moral compasses that sound the alarm when we feel like we're being treated unfairly. But 50-50 partnership marriages don't work because they tend to ignore the need to balance fairness with effectiveness. In other words, they ignore differences in strengths between spouses. After all, for a 50-50 marriage to play to the strengths of both spouses equally, you and your partner end up having to be virtually identical. But since you aren't, that means one of you is likely to be better at fixing the car than doing the laundry, or reading with the kids than roughhousing with them, or working late at the office for a promotion than picking up extra chores at home. And if you were to reverse your roles or split each of those roles in half, chances are all the responsibilities would be left wanting than if you guys were willing to play to your strengths and adopt different responsibilities. By dying on the hill of fairness or equality, spouses trapped in the fight for the 50-50 marriage tend to throw effectiveness totally out the window. They're forced to ignore their differences in what they bring to the marriage in order to adopt identical roles. Number 3, 50-50 marriages aren't even what most spouses want anyway. This one builds off of the previous issue in that for most people, what we're better at, we tend to enjoy more, and vice versa. So for spouses who've spent any amount of time getting to know each other, they realize that they have different interests and preferences when it comes to what they would like to be responsible for in their life together. For example, on average, mothers prefer to work fewer hours and spend more time with the kids, while fathers are willing to work more so they can provide financial security for the family. Men also prefer to fix things like cars, AC units, and computers, while women prefer caring for other people, like their kids or other family members or their neighbors. Of course, these are average differences between the sexes, and not all couples are going to perfectly fit into what I just described. But what is true for every single couple is that spouses are going to have different levels of interest in the various responsibilities of work and home life. And when we ignore these differences in pursuit of equality, we end up a lot less happy in our roles. And number 4, ultimately, these marriages lead to resentment. This is true for all of the reasons mentioned above, and because this sort of micromanaging of each other's efforts to ensure fairness leads to a tit-for-tat mentality. Tit for tat means I will do something for you once you do something for me. In other words, it's a transactional approach to love and commitment rather than a generous approach. Tit for tat scorekeeping leads to spouses being far more focused on what the other person is giving rather than what they themselves are giving. And the more you focus on your spouse's efforts instead of your own, the more likely you are to start noticing when your spouse falls short, at least in your eyes. Then to compensate, spouses will often start to give less so that they can get back to more of a 50-50 split or balance. So where they may have started at 50-50, having all of their responsibilities covered, over time, both spouses either grow increasingly resentful or increasingly stingy with their time, effort, and affection. Alternatively, some spouses will try to force each other to change. But since we obviously can't require change in anyone but ourselves, this usually wins us frustration and more resentment. If the 50-50 marriage is starting to sound like a no-win scenario to you, that's because it almost always is. So what's the alternative? I personally prefer to think about relationships as 100-100, meaning that both spouses give 100% of what they have to offer every single day. And some days that 100% is going to look like more or less than other days, because life throws curveballs and some days we're just tired or we have less to give. But the important thing is that both spouses are not keeping tabs on each other's effort, and instead they are A, focused on their own generosity and attitude, B, willing to ask for help from their spouse and others when they need it, and C, happy to give help when their spouse asks for it. Okay guys, what did you think? Does this align with your experiences in committed relationships and marriage? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, I'm Cameron, and this is Modern Marriage.